On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Sandeep Bhadra. He is the general partner at Vertex. We're going to be talking about supporting early stage founders. Obviously, sometimes being a founder is a lonely road. I mean, you're in it, you're grinding, and sometimes having that support system is crucial and critical. And also, when you are transitioning from another role, whether you're an engineering leader, you're an IC, and you become a founder, you are missing some of those skills. So you definitely need some help along the way. You need some coaching, you need some mentorship, and it's not always easy to ask for help. So that network and that support system is crucial. Sandeep, thanks for coming on to talk to us about this today.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Amir, on the podcast.
Absolutely. All right. Before we start, tell everyone what Vertex does.
There's a bunch of Vertex funds around the world. Vertex US, which is what I'm a part of, has been in business for almost 9 years now. And we write seed and Series A checks into very early stage companies, primarily in infrastructure software, which we broadly define as software that another technical buyer uses or buys. I would say that's about 2/3 of our portfolio, and the other third is applications of sort of data-driven applications for a variety of business use cases. Obviously, today you can't be on a podcast without talking about AI, and it's definitely true that so many of today's business workflows are getting transformed by AI, and we're excited to back very talented technical founders who are going after these opportunities.
All right. So we're going to be talking about supporting early stage founders. I mentioned, obviously, founders, they have an idea, they have passion, they want to start a business, they want to solve a problem, they want to bring about change, lots of different reasons. Let's talk about the actual founder and some of the psychology behind the role, right? So a lot of us from the outside looking in see founders and we hear about them in the media and we hear about them in the news and we're like, wow, this sounds glamorous. This person's, all the things that come with it, right? But obviously that's further along. And there's a lot of process that goes with that before you can get there. Talk to me a little bit about that road. And obviously you mentioned to me it's a lonely road. I've heard this a couple of times, but I've not yet covered it. So tell us a little bit about being lonely and some of the challenges and why it is lonely.
Look, I mean, fundamentally, people start businesses or people start companies because they think that there is a gap in the world and they're the only people who are well suited or perfectly well suited. They have the right idea, the right team, the right skills to go and solve this interesting, important problem. And if you don't, the sense is if I don't do it, then it's not going to get done. And it's kind of my job as a human being as a creator, to sort of give birth to this and to, make this happen, to manifest this. And the stats on success for startups are sort of well known, and the odds are stacked against you, quite frankly. Even if you have a brilliant idea, and it might be too early, it might be too late. There are various learning stages that a founder experiences, going from being a founder to being a CEO of a thriving large company. And it's best described as this journey of personal growth. And all journeys of personal growth, whether it is in sort of your private sphere or in the public sphere or in the professional setting, just involves a lot of introspection, a lot of hard experiences, and growing through that. And that is very personal, and it's very lonely. We advise founders typically to have co-founders, because at some level nobody can experience what you're experiencing, like having a co-founder or two in your business. And then because there are challenges, even if everything else, even if the business is humming, right, there are growth challenges. You're dealing with people, you're dealing with customers, and the truth is nobody has all the answers. And the reason why I think people need coaches is so that you can bring out the best in an individual. The best athletes in the world have coaches. The best musicians in the world have coaches. And I think that in almost any aspect of sort of endeavor, for any human endeavor, it is always good to have someone in your corner who can make the highs a little less high and the lows a little less low for you and provide perspective. And I think that that's the job of a coach.
I like that explanation. And I guess you mentioned something about founders. They see a gap. They feel like they're the only ones that can potentially, with their team, with their knowledge, whatever is, solve a potential problem or bring about a change or whatever that might be. I guess a lot of times they have a hypothesis and they're coming to a venture capital firm. They're talking to companies for fundraising. They have to sell this vision. It's sometimes bold statements, lots of hopes, dreams with fundamentals, but they're putting themselves out there saying, I can do this. Like, bet on me. I am the person that will deliver this. That's a lot of pressure. And it also makes me feel, on the flip side, it almost makes it a little bit harder. I mean, if you have co-founders, as you mentioned, it's one thing. And even if you do have co-founders, it does pose a little bit of a problem to go reach out and say, hey, I said this 2 weeks ago, you guys gave me a check, but you know what? I'm having some questions about how to do X, Y, and Z. Tightrope. Obviously, you want to support the founder because it's in your best interest. They might not want to bring that to the table. Talk to us about that dynamic.
For the most part, I think that it's non-consensus ideas that, whose time comes basically shortly after the company starts building a product or a service. Those are the ones that truly take off and make exceptional businesses, right? Like, nobody thought that staying in a stranger's house is going to be like a big business, and we have Airbnb. Nobody thought that people would just start driving their cars and letting other people just ride them along with them, and now we have Uber. But it's actually true for almost like any endeavor, right? Like this company called Dot Cloud pivoted into Docker, for instance, because they suddenly realized that they have this really nice format for packaging containers and for packaging file systems. And I think that most good ideas are non-consensus, so it takes a fair bit of convincing that, hey, the crystal ball that I want you to gaze along with me, that is going to be real in the future. But oftentimes, how to get from point A to that ultimate point B, like that's a very zigzag, non-linear, wandering the forest sort of experience. And I think that founders come in really or founding teams come in, I think, two big flavors. I think there's founders who are always actually like very, very candid about like what has been done, what has not been done, and they have this sense that, oh, I'm telling you that X is possible, but I'm also going to manage your expectations, and I'll tell you that, like, hey, you know what, we are struggling here. And I think for those founders, I almost feel like I have to push them to say, hey, you know what, you could actually be talking about yourself in a better light, and you don't necessarily need to downplay or underplay yourself so much. Like, I mean, and I think a lot of like very technical folks struggle to actually paint a big vision or talk very grandiosely, because most engineers tend to be like, hey, show us whether the code runs, show us whether what you've built works. But I think, and then there's sort of the other kinds of founders who are like who are constantly who constantly talk about, oh yeah, we're gonna get around this problem, we're gonna get around that problem. And sometimes they're trying to sort of fake it till they make it, and your job basically is to earn the trust such that they can actually be unguarded around you and tell you, yeah, you know what, like, I'm actually struggling with this. And sometimes it takes the form of going on a walk with them, sometimes it takes the form of just sort of sitting down, like looking at the business and being like, hey, look, I'm here to try to help you, but it's not going to be possible for me to help you unless you ask for help. And you're not going to ask for help unless you think there is something wrong with you, with what's going on in the business. And I think that oftentimes it's very hard to ask for help. It's very hard, especially to tell your investor or board member that things are not going absolutely right. But I think that the best moments are when there's a frank acknowledgement that, hey, X, Y, and Z are going well, but A, B, and C are like issues that we need to tackle. So let's just, gird our loins and like see if we can figure out how to solve this problem. I think that the dynamic that doesn't work is of, and we have all been there, like, of the investor pointing out flaws and saying, oh, you're not doing X, you're not doing Y, and X is, or, it's very easy, even for me, to like get trapped into asking questions which feel like interrogations rather than like, hey, let's try to solve a problem together. And, our job as coaches and investors is to try to avoid that dynamic as far as we can.
Absolutely. I mean, it's also, you mentioned something interesting about, asking questions, trying to help guide someone versus asking questions and coming off critical. And I think that's as a parent, it's difficult. Like, I mean,
right.
that's not easy. I guess talk to us a little bit about that, because obviously you guys are early stage VC, you guys are early stage fund. You guys have people coming that might be early stage in terms of career, in terms of, they might be a first time founder. When they approach you and they want that balance of coaching versus advice, that's tricky for you because you might know the answer, but also providing the answer doesn't really teach them anything. And they may not be willing just to listen when you say do X because it doesn't fit their philosophy. That's a little bit of pressure on you and your team. And how do you guys work with that?
I've personally required a lot of coaching to be good at finding that balance, to be candid with you. And I think that it's super important that I think most investors who want to be board members and want to be engaged investors actually, take some form of coaching and some form of, learning how to have tough conversations and learning how to deal with conflict. The beauty is that most good things come out of conflict. So, conflict is actually good because it forces people to reevaluate their priors and, look at solutions together. I just think that, it took me a fair bit of coaching to actually be good at asking questions in a way that allows people to express themselves while at the same time, is constructive, and we can go work on this problem together. Absolutely. And I think I would recommend coaching to definitely to investors who are engaged as board members.
As if you're looking at first time founders, are there skills that you see typically they lack when there are skills, but what are the more common ones and could they be worked on if you want to be a founder one day, that you could work on them? So I guess the questions, what do you see as some of the gap in terms of first time founders and skills, and are those skills something that can be worked on before you actually move into that founder role?
I think it's two things. My perspective on this is biased based on the companies that we back, right? I talked about how we end up working with very technical founders, who's kind of your audience as well, right? And I think that typically, and this is true for second-time founders as well as first-time founders, I think that technologists tend to underestimate two things. I think one is we believe we can build anything. But the flip side of building a company is trying to figure out distribution, right? It's trying to understand, hey, instead of talking about what things my widget can do, let me truly introspect into what the customer's pain is, why they would consider buying something, why are they here talking to me in the first place. And, I think that articulating that, the pain, it's very obvious to technologists because it's like, oh yeah, of course I know this problem exists. The truth is that, figuring out of the whatever 3 or 4 billion people in the world, who actually has that pain and trying to reach them in the most efficient manner, that is the job of distribution. And you cannot do that unless you have very well-defined criteria to evaluate and understand, and questions to evaluate and understand, hey, if I sift through all of these people in the world, which of them are actually people that care about what I'm building? And I think so I think first-time founders don't think about distribution as deeply as second-time founders do. Second-time founders think about distribution first almost. And then, as you grow a business and as you grow a company, by definition, you'll not be the expert at everything. So you will need to know how to trust people, whereas also evaluate them and manage them. And I think that that's the other big second skill, which is, hey, how do I lead and manage teams who have a functional capability which is completely different from what my strong suit is. How do I, as a technologist, how do I manage a sales team? Or as a marketer, how do I manage an engineering team? I think that those are two common sort of areas of improvement. Having some understanding, like public speaking, or trying to talk about what you're building to an audience, I think builds the skills of trying to read the audience, to try to understand, hey, do these people care about what I'm talking about? Do these people care about what I'm building? I think that gives you some sense of understanding distribution, understanding your audience. I think that technologists will be well suited to practice that in their career. And then the second one, is sort of very fundamentally about like working in large teams and trusting other people. Some people have talked about like, hey, playing team sports helps you understand that, because somebody's playing in a different position on the field as you, and you have to trust that they would do their job and you would do their job, and it all works together. But I think there's sort of lots of other domains in which you can gain leadership by learning to listen, learning to ask the right questions, and basically figuring out how to hold people accountable for what they think they can do, and helping them and unblocking them, which is kind of things that you can actually learn along the way.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question around, obviously you're dealing with a lot of early stage founders, and the notion of pivoting, and the notion of sometimes having to be patient and let the idea formulate, right? Pivoting too soon versus waiting too long. I think it's a lot of art, not science, because I think it's very difficult. But when it comes to first-time founders who you mentioned distribution, they're looking for product market fit, the MVP. How do you support a founder when they're still going through that process of trying to identify the right fit to the market, and being patient and developing that core thesis they had versus pivoting and jumping to another idea because they might not have thought that idea through as well? And that's a dynamic we see play out a lot of times.
Yeah, I wish I had a good answer for this, to be candid with you. Look, obviously, as investors, we have invested in a particular idea or a particular concept of what the company should be. And so it's very hard for us to usually support a pivot, right? Like, and we definitely have companies which have pivoted. One rewrote their entire code base, and the core idea was still the same, the product was still the same, but they had to rewrite the whole whole tech completely. And I was skeptical, to be candid with you, and I was like, hey, can we time box it? Basically, can you tell us that, hey, in 6 months if this doesn't succeed, then we should probably abandon this idea. Like, I think that's probably one way to think about it. And I think that the place where pivoting too often, or hey, let's build X, or now let's try building Y, or let's try building the next thing, I think that that dynamic is almost certain to fail if you just keep building rather than trying to figure out who cares about what I'm building fundamentally. And I think that it is easy to see a pattern when teams end up, just building because they feel the intuition of, oh, I should build X. Oh, X is not working. Or maybe I should try building Y. Instead of starting to build the next thing, it's almost like, I've done this. I've asked founders to ask themselves, like, hey, who would want this? Okay, it's great that X is not working. That's fine. Okay, now before we go out and build Y, why don't we just pretend like we have built Y? And why don't we try to figure out, like, who are the 5 people that would even care about the fact that we built Y, and really ask them, hey, if we build it today, like, would you take delivery of this product in in 2 months from now? And that lean experimentation, like, I think if founders are resistant to doing that, I think it's never going to work out. Whereas, the most successful founders have oftentimes pre-sold the second thing, even when they're, even when they're thinking about building it.
That's interesting. I think As I was listening to you, I was starting to think about, you come to a junction of a problem I can't solve or problem that's not solvable. And I think that becomes really a challenge when you're knee deep in it and you have the pressures of delivering. I think that's really hard to tell. And I think what you just articulate is it's very interesting advice, because that forces you to test the hypothesis with even less than MVP, and you have to use some of your sales and sales skills that might not be your strength, and that's unknown territory for you.
Yeah, and famously in Amazon, they make you write the press release of if you release this product today, what would the press release look like? Who would what customer would quote what feature and benefit and how it has made their life better. So think about that first before you go ahead and build a product.
I like that. I like that advice. I think that's fantastic. I'm going to start using it myself next time my wife has me come up with an idea that I think is going to fail. I'm going to write my press release so that I can fail before I start the project at home.
That's right.
All right, man. I got to let you get back to it. Before I let you go, obviously we didn't cover this topic exhaustively. People might have questions that you might be great at answering. What's a good way of people connecting with you?
I'm pretty active on Twitter. It's called X now, and my handle is last name first name Bhadra Sandeep. You can also find me on LinkedIn. First name's last name. You can just search for it. I think those are probably the easiest ways. Our website is vvus.com. You can just click on the team and actually send an email to me directly from the team page on the website as well. Thank you.
Awesome. I definitely appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Take care, Amir. This was wonderful.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think we covered a lot of great points on this topic. Sandeep did a great job of walking us through, especially when you're an early stage founder and you are looking for resources. Obviously, your investors are great. Door, your co-founder. We talked about some of the gaps and what to do if you have to pivot or should you pivot. So I think a lot of things that are interesting in this episode. So share it with somebody else who's either a founder, might want to be a founder, or just kind of curious about what that life would look like. I appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what the podcast is doing for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.